You know how we flip through the channels while comfortably laying on the couch and settle for an episode of Law and Order or Criminal Minds? You know how you see the gruesome case play out and think, whoa, this is a good one. Have you ever wondered what it'd feel like if you were the victim? In January of 2014, I went on a study abroad program to Australia. At the time, we were staying in Sydney, and most of our group was heading out that night to Pacha, Sydney for a little, or a lot of, dance fun. And I, being completely oblivious to how fun that stinking place is, decided to call it an early night and stay at the hotel. The next morning, everyone dragged in around 5 a.m., and I couldn't sleep much past their drunken entrance, so soon after I decided to head out to this side street we infamously called Burberry Street, since the Burberry store there offered free Wi-Fi. Now, call me stupid for being a 5'3" girl heading out to hang out on a foreign street by myself, but it was a beautiful, crisp Sunday morning and the streets were clean and quiet. I felt no danger ever while walking around that area. So, there I sat on the bench in front of the Burberry with headphones in while FaceTiming my then boyfriend. After a few moments, I noticed a young man, maybe around 28, had sat down on the bench across from me. And me being completely caught up in the conversation, I hadn't even noticed him or that he was staring at me. The funny thing was, he had a huge grin on his face as if we were some long-lost best friends. I just politely smiled back, then went right back to FaceTiming. A few minutes passed and the young man stood up and walked into my peripheral vision and stood there anxiously stepping back and forth from left to right foot, like a child waiting to see their birthday surprise, all the while still grinning. This is when I assessed his appearance. He was dressed in black from head to toe. He even had black hair slicked back really nice and had black eyes and pale skin. I looked at him and furrowed my brow out of curiosity, and this is when he held his right hand up and seductively bit his knuckles at me. At this point, I started to feel that fight or flight instinct and stood up and started slowly backing away, keeping the man to my front and the beginning of the street to my back. He smiled even larger and started to mimic my movements, backing away while still watching me. Finally, he turned around and walked towards his end of the street, but kept looking back and grinning at me over his shoulder. I turned around too at this point and quickly whispered to my then boyfriend, who was confused as hell on the screen, what was going on and that I was going to lose Wi-Fi really quick because I was hightailing it out of there. As soon as I reached the end of the Burberry Street back to my main street, I sighed in relief and looked both ways before crossing, and to my surprise, the man had caught up to me and was standing to my left on the other side of the street, watching me while talking to someone inside a darkly tinted black car. I freaked out and took the right and began power walking towards the nearest coffee shop, only to find that the lights were on but the doors weren't unlocked yet. When I looked back to the man who was casually walking at the same speed, car following him and staying about half a block behind me, only now he wasn't smiling. At this point I started running, and damn, you always think how fast you could run with adrenaline, right? Well, when fear overcomes adrenaline, it's a different story. My legs felt like jello and every step felt as if bricks were tied to the bottom of my feet. I looked back quickly, and that's when I saw this guy right on my tail, and that is when he reached out. He yanked my arm violently. I lost balance and smack. My feet flew out from under me as I landed on the concrete in this order: elbows, palms, face, and then the rest of my body. I tried to get up as I hit the ground, but everything was dizzy and in slow motion. Thankfully, a nearby restaurant owner was unlocking the restaurant's door and saw what happened and rushed at us while shaking his fist at the man. The black car gunned it down the street and the man smirked and held his hands up, slowly backing away and then turning around and walking swiftly away. At this point, I started shaking violently and crying out of fear and then eventually pain. The restaurant owner kindly rushed me into his shop and sat me down at the table with a pack of ice and soon a cup of coffee. Eventually the police took a report, but nothing could be done. I refused to go to the hospital, and thankfully it was only a couple of bad bruises and skinned elbows. To this day, I still don't know the man's intentions, but I am 100% positive they weren't good ones. If that restaurant owner hadn't been coming into his shop early that day, I don't know where I would be. Number 2. This happened to my father in 1975 in a little country bumpkin town when he was 7 years old and his sister was 9. I will be typing this out as he recounts what happened. My father was a truck driver who had to be up at 2 a.m. every morning. That meant we had a rule in our house that no matter what, you can't wake Dad up when he goes to bed at 7 p.m. My mother worked at an old folks home till 10 p.m. every night. So for a couple of hours it was just me and my sister in the house by ourselves. It was our bedtime one night, so me and my sister went to bed. In a couple minutes I heard something hitting the side of the house. Then it started hitting my window. It was really weird, so I got my sister to come in my room. We looked out the window and saw a man bouncing one of my toys against the window and catching it. He put his hand to his mouth and motioned for us to be quiet. Then, he motioned for us to go outside and play with him. We were frozen in fear. Then he started walking away and we couldn't see him out the window. We ran to the kitchen and there he was motioning for us to open the sliding glass door. We knew we couldn't wake my dad up, so we ran and hid in the living room. The man walked to our front door and started whispering something we couldn't understand and making scratching noises. All we could do was cry and remain paralyzed. We saw car lights approaching the house. It was my mother returning home from work. We watched as the man ran off the porch and hid behind my father's truck. We watched the man smile and wait till our mother got out of the car. She got out, opened the trunk, got her belongings, and walked up on the porch. I'm embarrassed to say we were too scared to open the door and warn her. All we could do was watch as the man sneakily tiptoed behind her. She opened the front door and shut it behind her. She saw us hiding, and just as she was about to yell at us for being up so late, she saw our fear-stricken eyes glued to the glass on the front door. She turned around and saw his face pressed against the glass and him jiggling the doorknob. She screamed, put all her weight against the door, locked the door, and called my grandfather, who lived a street over. Then the man shouted profanities and how he was going to rape her children in front of her. She called the police and told them as well. Next thing we know, my grandfather is speeding up the driveway with his gun out the window, just firing it randomly. The cops pulled up just as the man took off into the woods. They saw his back, but that was it. They chased through the woods with dogs and a whole squad out searching. Other officers inspected the house and saw multiple scratch marks at our doors and the side of the house. Apparently, he tried to break in and couldn't, so he tried to lure us into letting him in. They never found who it was, and that was the last we ever saw him. We were all pretty traumatized for a while, but it didn't bother our dad one bit. In fact, he didn't wake up the entire time. So, weirdo back in 75, I'm so glad we haven't met again, because if we do, you'll be the one who says, let's not meet. Number 3. 5. I'm so glad we haven't met again, because if we do, you'll be the one who says, let's not meet. Number 3.
We're clothes. Oh, hey! What this?
Ooh, what's that? A new scarf? Black nail polish? Maybe something for my collection? Ooh, I hope it's still alive.
Whatever! You can open it tomorrow!
Is it Piper's dress? This is so cool! Is it Fang's sneakers? A sulfur spike? Rock's hair? Or a human head?
Around 6 years ago, I worked in a small convenience store in a pretty quiet neighborhood. I was around 18 at the time, maybe a little older, and all of the staff members were female. With it being such a small store, we literally had 5 staff members who rotated shifts. I remember that when this incident took place, the manager had decided to take sick leave, and that left little old me to run the store as I had been working there the longest. Our tiny little shop opened at 5 in the morning, and being the good sport that I am, I decided that I would work the early shifts because the other members of staff were a little nervous with their lack of training on opening, and the fact that it was in the middle of winter, it was actually a little unnerving opening a store completely on your own while it's so dark and evidently quiet. This one morning, I opened the shutters at around 4:30 a.m. I turned on the crappy little heater as I made my way out to the back to make myself a coffee. Then went to the front of the store where our newspapers were sat, waiting to be put onto the shelves. I got the papers out and headed outside for a cigarette before opening. The few feet of snow added to the eeriness of this morning. Around 6 a.m. every morning, we would get a steady flow of builders and workmen coming in to buy a few Kit Kats and Red Bulls. Knowing them all quite well, I often took some form of comfort from knowing that if anything went wrong, I had a lot of big men heading in to save the day. This morning, 6 a.m. came and went, and I had literally not had a single customer. I bet the snow is too bad to work, I thought. I flicked through magazines and drank too much coffee just to keep occupied. At around 6:30 a.m., I popped into the kitchen to turn on the kettle, and I hear someone come in and cough at the counter. I make my way from out of the back and see a tall, lanky, intoxicated man standing there, staring at the cigarettes. I apologize for his delay and ask him what I can help with. I'm horrible. I was taken back a little bit by what this man had said, and I repeat myself and ask what I can help with. I need you to punch me in the face. I'm a terrible man. I don't know why I did it. I don't know. At this point, I was borderline shitting bricks. I know that if this man wants to hurt me, there is literally fuck all I can do. I'm tiny in comparison. I try to play it off as a joke and say something along the lines of, "Don't be crazy. I don't go punching people." The man is not amused by me. For the first time, he looks at me, leans over the counter, and starts slurring disgusting things that he wants to do to me. What if I fucked you so hard you couldn't breathe anymore? What if I made you bleed? I'm going to make you gag on me for being a slut. I need you to punch me. My heart had stopped. We had no panic buttons. The only phone I had was just out of reach, but even if I had gotten it, there was literally nowhere to lock myself in while I waited for help. I was frozen. I just stared at this man blankly until I heard, "What the fuck did you just say?" And a loud crack as I watched my bleedy raper friend's jaw was no longer in line with his face. Apparently, when I was making my coffee, 2 customers had came in. A lanky raper guide, one of my faithful builders that was later disappointed no one had informed him it was a snow day. My builder pal wrestled our lovely friend out of the store where he managed to pretty swiftly disappear considering the amount of snow. That morning, I made my builder friend a cup of tea and didn't charge him for his purchases as a massive thank you for what he did. God knows what may have happened. Number 4. I was 13 and just had my elementary school graduation ceremony. My friends and I decided to stay outside late and celebrate. We didn't drink at the time, so our idea of celebration was playing manhunt or whatever around our neighborhood until about 8 or 9 p.m. As the sun began to set, my friends made their way home one by one. A couple of my friends and I decided to stay out a little longer. To us, this was living dangerously, especially since our neighborhood was considered extremely unsafe. My girlfriend at the time, Victoria, said she had to go home first and check in with her mother to let her know where she was, as we didn't have cell phones at the time. She said she would go home for a second and come right back. She only lived about 2 blocks away from where we were hanging out, so no one made much of it. 10 minutes had gone by and we continued to play our games. 15 minutes had gone by and she still never came back. I've always been an unusually paranoid person. I currently have an anxiety disorder, so maybe that's why. So when she didn't come back, I started getting very concerned. It didn't make sense for it to take her this long to cover 2 blocks there and back. My friends reassured me that she was probably just convincing her mother to let her stay outside. Finally, after about 20 minutes, we see Victoria coming to us and crying with scratches on her right arm. She told us that on her way back to the park there was a car following her and she started walking faster because she was getting creeped out. She's used to getting whistled at by older men. She was a pretty mature and brave girl and usually didn't lose her cool when stuff like this happened. But I recall her saying that this time, a feeling of dread and gloominess washed over her. About after 30 seconds, the car pulled up next to her and a man in a mask came out and tried to grab her. She screamed and tried fighting back. The man was about to drag her to the car when suddenly another car was driving down the road, passing by them. When it came close enough, the man let go of her arm and went back to his car and drove away while she ran for her life back to the park. By the time she got back to the park, there was only 2 people remaining, me and Victoria's best friend Jennifer. Petrified, Victoria begged us to walk her back home and said that her dad would drop me and Jennifer off at our houses. It was pretty dark at this point, so obviously we agreed. We walked through the field and were walking through our school parking lot when suddenly we got blinded by the front lights of a car. As you would suspect, the man in the mask came out of the car. At first, I thought if he got close enough, me and my 2 friends might have had a shot at overwhelming him since it was 3-on-1 and would have had a chance to get away. At the very least, I could hold him off while they made a run for it. What happened next stripped me of every last bit of courage I had while fear and panic quickly came over me. 2 other men had come out of the car. One of them was a giant. At this point, I was scared shitless. There was a few meters between us when they came out of the car, but you could still hear them talking. "Oh look,
She's got a friend. Let's take her too," one of them said excitedly. I was probably the most frightened at that point. These monsters were going to take my friends and do God knows what with them. And chances are they were going to kill me if I stood in the way. I had to think quickly because they were getting closer. The parking lot was at a slight slant, sort of like a driveway, so there were bricks laid out to keep some of the teachers' cars from rolling backwards during the day. I honestly don't know what to call what I did next. It was either an act of bravery or complete insanity. I always considered myself to be a bit of a timid boy. Even cowardly at times, I always avoided fights and I used to get picked on, even though I was stronger than a lot of people in my grade. But this time, something came over me. I quickly grabbed one of the bricks beside me and threw it onto their car. It smashed their left light, which really pissed them off. I yelled at Victoria and Jennifer to run to the opposite direction while I held them off. I grabbed another brick and threw it into them when they tried to run after Victoria. It did keep them away and buy my friends a bit of time. Now, I should tell you that I ran track and I was pretty goddamn good at it. Top 3 in the city actually, so I was quite a bit strong for my age. And I was more than confident that they wouldn't catch me if I ran. After about 10 seconds, Victoria and Jennifer had covered maybe 40 meters or so, giving them enough distance between us. That really pissed the big guy off. He pulled out a box cutter and started charging at me. At this point, I ran to my left and sprinted as fast as I could and didn't look back. I ran all the way to the fence that bordered the school property. Unfortunately, it was way too tall for me to climb and the men were gaining on me quickly. Luckily, I remembered that close by, the bottom of the fences were cut open wide, enough for me to slide through. I knew this because I used to go through that hole to get into my friend Martin's backyard. By this time, the 2 smaller men were really close while the big fella was some ways back. I was pretty exhausted since I was running in dress clothes. On top of that, it was dark and I was having trouble finding the hole in the fence. I remember when I saw it, I ran for it as if I had been in the desert and saw an oasis of water. I tried to slide under the fence and run to Martin's back door, but one of the men had grabbed my tux jacket and tried to pull me back to their side of the fence. Growing up in this neighborhood, I had experienced a lot of scary stuff, but I had to say this was by far the scariest moment of my life. Have you ever felt that powerful feeling that transcends fear? The only word I can think of to describe it is death. I felt death. I felt my heart seize up as my limbs got heavier, all while my mind started becoming hyperactive as the stench of alcohol on the man came flooding into my nose. It was honestly